Women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 20% of its leadership. On Her Story, we'll explore the careers of bold and influential women from Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill and learn how they've overcome the odds. I'm your host, Sangela Jane, and this is Her Story, a program where we explore what's beyond the glass ceiling. I'm delighted to welcome Ivelyse Andino, founder and CEO of Radical Health. Ivelyse, welcome to Her Story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So your career is just really quite impressive. I know you have a couple of different kind of stints and different points of health technology, and now you're really blazing forward this area in what I'll call health fluency, which we'll talk more about later today. But just to kind of ground everyone, can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what Radical Health is and kind of what your mission is today?
Yeah, so Radical Health makes it really easy for people to come together, connect with people who have lived experiences, know how to access, engage with, and be really equipped to navigate a healthcare system that is really challenging. We use circles to have conversations, and our app helps people know what questions to ask before, during, or after a clinical visit, just to make sure that everyone has equitable and safe access to healthcare today.
Thinking about your kind of journey across healthcare and kind of what leading up to what you're doing today, we like to ask all of our guests on the show, do you consider your foray into healthcare leadership more accidental or intentional?
Oh, I would definitely say this was accidental. And it's a hard one to choose because I often say that my entry into healthcare was determined really by the zip code that I was born into. We all know in healthcare, your zip code determines your health. But for real, where I was born in the Bronx and where I live now, really is what shaped me back then, really gave me a passion and a drive. And I often say what I do today, as professional as it is, it really still is personal for me. So I'd say it was definitely a lot of, I feel like a ping pong ball maybe, kind of just back and forth, accidentally getting me to where I am today.
And I think what's really unique about your story is that a lot of the issues that you're trying to solve are grounded in experiences that you had, growing up in the neighborhood that you did. Tell us a little bit about kind of how your childhood and kind of where you grew up shaped your professional ambitions at that time. Like, what did young Ivelyse actually want to be doing, growing up?
I thought I was going to be a doctor. I showed up at undergrad and I was like, you did like declare your major. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a doctor. And it was the first time that I realized like, oh yeah, you don't just show up and say you're going to be a doctor. People in junior high school, right, are like prepping and you kind of know what's happening. In high school, you get ready. And so I guess I always knew that I'd be in healthcare. The doctor path just wasn't it for me. And actually it was the first time I had seen like, there's a system at play here that you kind of have to know about or even just understand to get into. Beyond that, I then just knew that like for me, being in community has probably been like the biggest motivator for me. That's been the piece that like along this whole journey has shaped me, has kept me, still does. And so I didn't become a doctor. I ended up though in marketing and doing that in healthcare and getting to work really early in some of the nice early spots of biotech and getting to see, I always say like I did what was called then like a national broadcast, but it basically was like the first iteration of Zoom where we had like folks in a television studio and streaming out. I'll just say this version that we're doing now is much easier. But I really got to see the ins and outs of healthcare and the biotech side and then doubled down in health tech. So it was really, really early there. Got to see how what we know today as health tech was really made. So we created like a first like platform that let doctors prescribe apps. And I just say, all of the experiences kind of just to my professional journey were all really special. And taught me so much, but also forced me to kind of look deeper too and really figure out, I was often the only person in all of those rooms and often the only woman, the only person of color, the youngest. And really, I think I'm grateful for all those experiences, but they also forced me then to like look at what I wanted to see differently.
So after a series of really incredible stints and kind of in that healthcare technology space, you then decided to build Radical Health, which is, if I get this correctly, the first Latina-owned organization that's really, what I'll say, using the power of conversations to really, make healthcare more equitable. Tell us a little bit about kind of the origin story. Where did the idea come from? What were you thinking at that time in terms of wanting to make the pivot from what I'll call more of the, traditional job to doing something on your own?
Yeah, it was interesting for me because when I started Radical Health, I talk about community often. I really didn't know what I was doing. What I did know was that I had worked at a bunch of companies. I made a lot of people a lot of money. But it felt so far removed from where I lived, my communities like mine. And what I was doing in the day to day didn't have any impact on what I was doing at home. And so starting Radical Health really just started around my kitchen table. We brought folks, I like basically anyone I met. I was like, do you want to come over and have a chat? Like I would pull people in the subway if I saw they were wearing scrubs. I'd be like, hey, I know you don't know me, but I'm having like a chat at my house. Do you want to come over? And really started building around that and really started listening to what people were saying. And not just healthcare providers, but community members, teachers, like government folks, and just starting to listen. And it was in those conversations that people really elevated and said, like, this isn't working for me. We had one teacher who was saying, like, I teach kindergartners and their parents are coming to me and I can't do anything and I don't know how to help them, but like I'm seeing folks every day. And so Radical Health really started, I guess, in those conversations. I guess I don't want to say that I always knew that like I could do something like this. So I never doubted my ability to start a company. I never doubted my ability to even challenge a whole kind of existing healthcare system to think about doing things differently. I've always been a little bit of a rabble rouser, you could say. But in starting Radical Health, it really became and still is a product of building with people and listening and really changing kind of the perspective to not, I don't have all the answers and I just am really good at listening and building with folks.
You kind of mentioned that you grew up in this very unique community in the Bronx. I know you have some family experiences up with your mom and things like that, which I'd love to share, talk about a little bit more about as well. But what were you looking for through those conversations?
I think I was looking for solidarity or I was looking at maybe to be heard myself. So I talk about, I worked in health tech. I worked in oncology with biotech, and my mom had cancer at the time while I was working in the middle of this industry. She got diagnosed with cancer. And it was just so hard to like be in the middle, like literally in the middle of this system, seeing drugs like that came through from the FDA, being rolled out and hearing all these success stories of people choosing like elective, right, treatment options. And then seeing my mom in a Bronx hospital, like without any of those options. I never even met her attending. And it's one of those things that to be in the middle of that and to feel so alone, but then go to work every day and be at the forefront of innovation and tech. And I'm changing this, and we're doing all these great things, but knowing that like, no, like that's never reaching me. One, it just felt really lonely and it felt really isolating. And I knew I was only imagining like if it's so hard for me and I'm quick-witted and I'm smart and I have resources, I can't be alone in this. And I think the contrast was also that everyone at work was like, this is great. It's working so well. Hooray. Let's keep going. And so I think in those initial conversations, I was really looking to be heard, to make sure that I wasn't imagining something or this wasn't just like a unique experience to me, that navigating the healthcare system was hard and it was difficult. And even though I had all the tips and tricks and tools, it still was unfair and unjust. So I think in those conversations, I wanted to be heard. And what I found, which was like the magic, was that in looking for my own just to kind of fact check or double check my own feelings, so many other people felt that way. And it wasn't just community members who I already anticipated that maybe there are people who like, maybe their parents themselves, they lived it. But then I started hearing from folks who were in healthcare or in kind of side industries saying, oh no, it's just as bad from the inside and the outside, and you're not alone in this.
I think what's so powerful in what you're talking about is this kind of gap in the different silos that we see. And, you were kind of at the epicenter of a lot of that. I know you've also shared with me kind of this idea of feeling like you never quite fit into some of those, sub industries, right? Like are you a health tech person with a technology background? Are you really kind of a health equity, public health champion? Like, how do you think about I guess, our industry's notion of defined roles or sectors in the context of what you were seeing and what you were trying to do when you were thinking about radical health?
I think, and some of this is just like, some of it is like just not knowing. So I didn't necessarily, I was young. I didn't really know all the sectors and silos. I didn't know that there were specific subsets, right, of healthcare. Because I got to come up in the biotech and then health tech space, no one had been doing that before. So I was like, oh, wow, this is a space. And I had a lot of freedom. So I didn't necessarily feel the constraints of like, this is public health and this is how it's done. And this is epidemiology and this is how it's done. I felt a lot of the fluidity. And actually, I think it was in that space that I could imagine other things. But to your point, I still feel like I don't fit in to any industry. So I have a semi-tech background, but I'm not a developer. So I don't necessarily feel like I'm straight in the line of tech. What we do is health tech, but it is really centering equity and using tech as a means to advance health equity, which might fall under public health. And folks would love to couch us, under public health, or even I've had a lot of people like, oh, well, that's nonprofit work. And we're like, no. What we're doing is just carving out another space that really meets people, communities, and systems where they are. And in the same way, other industries like finance and education have all seen this like momentum, this shift, this change. Like we're really pushing that. But again, centering the people and the communities that really haven't ever had a seat at that table to build with.
I mean, really what you're doing is bringing this intersectional view, which is so much needed in the industry. And so the way that I personally would look at it is you're kind of using the technology to kind of scale the impact from a public health point of view, but it's really kind of education, right? Like a lot of the conversations that you're forging is really driving this behavioral change. And so, I guess being myself a little bit on the education side too, there is this perception in the industry, in this kind of education, public health, that you can't really make a business out of it, right? It's like, how do you actually commercialize that? How do you sustain it? How do you get the funding to be able to do those things that are really needed over a long-term basis? Can you talk a little bit about kind of the actual, I guess, business model of, who Radical is working with and how do you actually, support yourself to be able to continue to scale these conversations?
Yes. So this was one of the things that early on, when we talk about like not fitting in, I tried to raise money for Radical Health and I was like, I've got this. I've worked at health tech startups. I'm made for this. And I couldn't get any funding. I didn't know then. This is when you don't know, which is almost better sometimes. But I didn't know then that Black or Latina women receive, 0.001% of all funding, right? I didn't know that I was in this rare unicorn league of women CEOs, of, Black Latina CEOs. I had no idea. Thankfully, the industry has been a little bit more vocal to say, oh yeah, like this is a challenge and we're going to try and work on it or at least be aware of it. So I had to bootstrap Radical Health. We got down and dirty. We found clients who aligned with us and believed in us. And so the way that we run today is we run, in business terms, B2B2C model, right? So we work with providers, we work with employers. They hire us and license Radical Health to be available, right, to their communities or to their employees. And what's really important here is, to the point of like, how does this impact both like especially on the financial side? What we know today, right, is that 90 million Americans don't have basic health information. And it doesn't matter how much money you make, who you know, it just is complicated. I mean, what's an mRNA vaccine over? I mean, we've all seen this year. It's wild. And when that happens, right, and you don't understand what's going on, we really start to tap into, I think previously we'd maybe called it like health literacy, but I think we're using this term like health fluency, right, which encompasses literacy, so like the ability to read and write and understand like knowledge, but then also like the actual knowledge of healthcare, right? So understanding the pieces, right, the ways that the system works, the way that maybe, right, you might need a prior authorization before you can get a procedure done. Then we run into like perception. So like, how do my customs and my culture impact how I view the healthcare system, which means I'm Puerto Rican. We use Vicks Vapor Rub, which is like a menthol rub for everything. That's your first run, right? Like before you do anything, you got to use some Vicks. And that's just the culture, and that's just the perception. So before I call my PCP, we're just going to see what we got here and make it work. But that's my unique cultural perception. And others have, different ones. And those are pieces that we need to incorporate into this understanding. And the last component that when we think about like this overall health fluency is really around confidence and trust. And so, today, only 44% of Black Americans actually trust the healthcare system to do what's right for them. And that's 20% less than white counterparts. So we're seeing a big, people don't understand, right? We have this like lack of like health fluency that doesn't really encompass all of the things that I mentioned. We don't have confidence in a healthcare system. And when you have those things, right now you ask people who have low health fluency, ask about 50% less questions when they're in a doctor's visit. And so it just makes for like, I think about like a job interview, right? Where I'm like, do you have any more questions? And you're like, no, I'm good, right? Or do you have any questions? You're like, I'm good. It doesn't make for a good experience. And that's just, to the financial piece, it's just costing us billions and billions of dollars. For someone with low health fluency who's on Medicaid, they cost annually about $10,000, which is 4 times higher than someone who has high healthcare fluency. That's around $2,600 a year. And this is like a community, cultural, people issue, but it's also a financial issue that we are working really hard to fix.
I love this concept of health fluency because we're not talking enough about that, to your point. I think, one of the things that we've talked a lot about and we've seen as an industry, especially coming out of this last year, is this concept of health equity. And without trying to be insensitive about it, I do think that health equity has kind of become the new buzzword for healthcare, this year, right? It's what does that actually mean and how do we solve it? So how do you kind of think about the connection between health fluency and then how the industry is, kind of thinking and talking about health equity? And then kind of I'll layer on one more piece, which is what do you think the broader industry needs to do to kind of help support what you and Radical are doing, but just kind of the broader ecosystem to really push the needle forward as we think about the next 5 years of the healthcare system?
Yeah, I think that this is a really great question. So how does health fluency and health equity play into the current system? I'll say this, I've been working and on these platforms and on all these things talking about health equity. And I've been doing it for so long and no one knew what I was talking about. For a long time, up until recently, I was moderating a panel and I had to give a disclaimer that we were going to talk about health equity and racism in healthcare. And just to get people ready to know that that was a conversation that I was going to talk about, I had to prep it with my panelists and, thankfully they were all on board. But it was a conversation that was happening, but really people weren't listening to. And now health equity is all the rage. It is the hottest thing. And it actually, in some ways, I have a really hard time because not everyone who talks about health equity understands or is actually doing something to move the needle. When we think about health equity, it's not just that maybe our services are in Spanish or French and that we're making ourselves, a little bit more accessible. That's one piece. And that really talks, right, to the literacy component. Can people read, write, understand what I'm saying? But health equity is so much more. It really involves looking at the systemic barriers. So when we talk about the actual knowledge, knowing what your rights are, knowing how a system works and how to adjust or move through that. And so I think that when we think about, kind of how this all plays in right now, I think there are a handful of companies and a few more on the way that are led by people who have lived experience. And I think that's one of the big things that I always look for. Do you know what you're talking about? And do you know how this impacts, right? And if you don't, that's okay, because you can still be an ally. You can still come alongside us. But I really look for who has lived experience, who's doing this and understands it. There are a few companies coming through that are really centering this. And I think we're right at the beginning, right? I think a lot of old companies have pivoted to health equity. But I think we're right at the beginning. It reminds me of the early days of health tech, where we're going to see a lot more folks, a lot more companies coming up and really opening the doors to see, again, new innovations that really encompass this idea of intersectionality, that encompass the idea of working together and creating real solutions that are built by and for communities that have been often ignored.
That's so powerful. And I think it's like, as we talked a lot about in the kind of the health tech and innovation space, right? It's like, in many ways, you and Radical, you guys started back in 2015, if I remember correctly, right? We're really a pioneer in this space. And now kind of as time has progressed and there's a little bit more awareness around the issue, now you're starting to see more of these companies and initiatives kind of following suit. I guess to that point, though, you also mentioned how hard it was to get funding. And I think part of that, is also just the lack of awareness of how the industry was talking about, these issues back at that time. What advice would you give to other female founders, especially those, women of color who may be trying to, start something or create a market for an issue set that may not be as, for lack of a better word, maybe mainstream at that time, and kind of push through that? How do you think about that?
For anyone who's considering entering or starting, whether it's a company, an initiative, or even just like shifting, right? And you're early. One of the advice, I got really great advice from actually an advisor, an investor, who said, you're not wrong, you're just early. And there was something about that, and that's something that I carry with me now. I'm often, I'm wrong sometimes, but I'm often not wrong in the conviction and in what I know to be a problem. I'm just early. And so for the women of color who are considering jumping into a system that wasn't, or jumping into an industry that wasn't created or designed for our full participation, right? I'd say do whatever you can to stay the course. You are likely early. You're not wrong. I'd also say, what really helped me was knowing my worth and my value. And honestly, bootstrapping my company is what gave me the longevity and the sustainability to keep at it for so long and to kind of wait for the industry to catch up. I think back, I talk a lot about not getting those checks early on, but I think not getting those checks was probably one of my biggest blessings, because it forced me to find the other pockets. And we started outside of healthcare. So we started in education doing health equity work. But it forced me to find the other pockets where people were a little bit more eager, a little bit more open to prove this concept and model, to generate revenue that allowed us to weather a pandemic and do all the work that we're doing. And to now be in a place where we are leading, where we're modeling, and we're showing that you can run a company, be profitable, have incredible impact on multiple levels, and build with community in a way that hasn't been done before.
Oh, that's such great advice. Thank you for sharing that. To your point about being early, so as you think about, the last, 6 or so years of Radical Health and the kind of different stages of as the organization has evolved, how has kind of your focus or the things that you've had to think about as the leader of the organization evolved alongside the evolution of the organization?
I did not know that I would be a finance raise venture capital pro. That was never in my roadmap. That's probably the biggest shocker right now. But I do think the evolution or my growth alongside Radical Health, in many ways, I've grown up alongside Radical Health. When I started, I still had this mindset that, blend in, fit in. I often talk, about when I worked in healthcare, I had to dim myself or dull my presence even. I would straighten my hair, and you'd never find me with this bright red lip in a corporate, office, and really hide the pieces of me that made me me. And Radical Health, I think, really allowed me to step into who I am, all the beautiful pieces of my culture, my body, my brilliance that I could bring to work. And so I think that early on, that was the biggest gift that I had to offer. I could be real, I could be in community and with CEOs and be the same person. And I think that was one of the earlier lessons. And then as we've grown, right, I've had to run a company and learn how to operate and do finances and taxes and hire and do a lot of the things that were a little less on the actual service side, but on the operating side. And now it's exciting because I get to now do a lot more visioning, a lot more where are we going, a lot more collaborating, and even imagining things that I'd never thought would be possible. So it's been a really, I think one of the biggest joys that maybe I don't often highlight are that alongside my company, I'm growing and evolving with it.
Well, leadership is a constant kind of learning journey, so that's definitely a testament to that. I think what you were referring to, I love this word that you used in our earlier conversation around this idea of like almost like physically muting yourself. And curious, sounds like you realized over time that, you didn't have to do that. Do you think that was just a personal reflection, like kind of going back? Do you think that, younger Ivelyse would have the confidence to knowing that it was okay, that to kind of fully embrace who you were? Or do you think that was just part of the evolution of our industry and kind of the timing where we are? Like, how do you kind of balance the kind of personal confidence with kind of where, the industry and the ecosystem actually is to be able to be comfortable to do that?
When I think about how I started, I was always taught, do great work, work twice as hard, right? Do whatever you need to do to get the job done, and just conform, right? In most of the places, even in school, at work especially, I was the only Latina for sure, right? There were a few other women, but like there weren't even enough of us. And we were often scolded or told, right? Like if we spoke up. I remember I had a job early. I was in high school and I did this program where I went to high school one week and then I went to work another week, and I worked in financial services. And it was incredible. I was young. I was probably 16 years old. It was so great. But I remember, right, getting told that like my outfits were too bright. My colors were too bright, and that's something that like that feedback I can understand maybe. But now like I think about how that was kind of like the beginnings of, don't be too loud, don't be too bright, just stay under the radar. And you carry that. And over and over again, I've spoken up in meetings, and I think that confidence I really wish early on had been instilled. So I think about, for the people listening now, if young people, young women, right? Like that confidence is something that I think I had, but was broken in me and told me, right? Like was told or instilled, like not to listen to. And I had to find it along the way. And what I found was I actually had a lot of great, mentors and bosses who would go into rooms and didn't know anything and would be so confident. And I remember just watching and saying, oh, but you could do that. And why can't I? And I think that what made the big difference for me to find that confidence to like, shine out was actually not being inside of a large healthcare system or a large corporation, being on the outsides, being on the outskirts and kind of fighting my way in really gave me the space to do that. And I think being in community with other women founders, other folks who were also on the outside and seeing their freedom really inspired me and gave me back the confidence to say that it's not just freedom in how I dress or how I talk, but also freedom in how I think and how I challenge the current healthcare system.
You really kind of touched on a couple of themes that we always love to talk about. And I think really underlying a lot of what you said is, longer leadership journeys, there's a lot of great mentors and colleagues that kind of help guide us along the way. And it often instills, kind of set of belief systems that, maybe we think early on in our career. And then, as we progress, we realize, oh, they're maybe not actually as true as we may have thought or we're told to believe. And I think unlearning some of those belief systems is half the challenge. So Ivelyse, I know that we share some family in Tampa. Are you in Tampa or are you in the Bronx today?
I'm coming to you from the Bronx with all the Bronx beauty, including we have birds, there's an airplane, there will probably be a motorcade of motorcycles coming down very shortly. But the landscape you hear, this is the Bronx at its best.
So when you talked earlier about, having to physically mute yourself, you had this great story about, when you got your kind of first gray hair, so to speak. Tell us about that.
For so long, right? A lot of this, I've always been the youngest in my office. I think what the average age of a healthcare employee is at like 65, right?
Yep.
So I feel like I've often been the youngest. I got started really early. And so I had to really fight to be taken seriously. And so when I got my first gray hair, I was so proud of it. I would place them. I had two of them actually. I got two at the same time. I clearly was very stressed, but I would place them strategically on the top of my head so that folks would know that I wasn't like, I mean, I was in my 20s, but they would maybe think I was a little older. And now we've got a few more, and now I'm a little less particular about where they stand. I try to actually hide them a little more now, but it was really, a moment where I knew that I needed to like camouflage in some ways, but use whatever I had to fit in and to blend in and to be taken seriously.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that's just so important because we always talk a lot about how, people are trying to make themselves look younger, especially in maybe like the tech world, but that phenomenon still exists on the other end of it where you have a lot of young founders who are trying to, blaze forward in an industry that is, a little older. There are many fun facts about your story that I love, but one of them that I think is worth highlighting is you actually founded Radical Health while you were on maternity leave, which is a rare thing. Talk a little bit about kind of what you were thinking at that time and kind of the origin story behind it.
I worked my whole life. I started working, I mentioned right at 16 in high school. I went to school 1 week, worked the next. From there, I've always had a job. I've done everything. I've like waitressed and bartended. I've done it all. And for me and my family, I had to work. I didn't have the luxury of taking time off while I was in school. I went to school full time and I had to work. And so that kind of carried into my corporate career. I've worked at startups, I've worked for agencies, and I was no stranger to like the grind culture. And so then I found myself pregnant and was super excited and really like, okay, here we go. And what happened was that I actually, for the first time while I was on maternity leave, for the first time I had a break. And some people might not say or see that as a break, but for the first time I didn't have to work hard for anyone else. I had a little person. And if I'm honest, and not everyone's journey is the same, so I always want to caveat that, but taking care of a brand new baby was so much easier than working at a health tech startup. But it gave me the freedom and the space to be creative. It gave me the freedom and the space to organize, to be home. I think for a lot of us, even this year of the pandemic, we've been home more than we've been kind of for the rest of our whole lives. And so on maternity leave, I guess you can call that, it was kind of my pre-mini quarantine, but it allowed me to stay home. It allowed me to have space and time to explore the things that I wanted to do, to organize, to invite people over, and to sit and like create.
That is just so powerful. And you're right. I mean, in some ways, those parallels to, COVID quarantine, I think are there, both personally, and a lot of other friends and colleagues have shared similar sentiments where they've had this kind of space to just think and reflect and, be more creative. As you kind of play that out, kind of looking forward then, so how do you hold yourself accountable to create those kind of spaces for yourself, when you're not on maternity leave or you're not in the middle of a pandemic, so that you give yourselves those, that freedom to kind of reset and kind of, get out of that day-to-day grind, so to speak?
I'm still struggling with the making space for myself. I'm still struggling with making space to just be, and not work and not mom and not friend. Like, I'm still really, really struggling with that. I try my best to, do the things that we all know, this idea of like self-care and vacations, and yes. But I do think that I'm learning, right, that self-care isn't pretty. It's actually sometimes really hard, and sometimes it's discipline, and sometimes it is accountability, and sometimes it is the hard choices, and it's still very much a practice for me. it is still very much an exercise. It's kind of like going to the gym. Like it's hard to do. But I get to do that again. I talk about my crew. I have such an incredible crew of folks around me, from like the people that I work with, my like crew of other CEOs and founders and you know, our investors. Like, I have such a crew around me, and they're so incredible and honest and really challenge me to take that space and to take that time and to know that, you know, rest and free space is also like a radical act of healing and care.
And the other piece of that, I mean, I'd be curious what you think. I think we sometimes are chasing after these, you know, big extended periods of time, and time is one of our most precious resources. But sometimes it's the small little day-to-day habits that kind of give us those outlets. Curious, do you have any kind of like a daily habit that you really try to stick by that's kind of your centering mechanism?
I don't know if it's centering. I can't believe I'm even going to say this. I'm going to go for it. But I've started this new practice in my life, and it's actually, I've been doing it for a few months now. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's kind of has, you know, 3 components. The one is like, I drink water, 2 cups of water every day. I will not let coffee touch my lips unless I have these 2 cups of water. And I really use that as a moment to, like, before I even start this day, I'm going to like hydrate and care for my body. And my other founder hack, and I've been sharing this with everyone else who's on the run, is I have a salad before every meal. And like, that is also just like another just stop. And like, before I can get to my mac and cheese, I'm going to eat a salad. And it is just the way of like just pausing. Some salads are really great. Some of them are not. And so it's just another way of pausing, and just taking a moment. And I think for me, that's kind of the practice right now. It's like, before anything enters my body, especially around food, I really want to like just be mindful and slow down. And so those are the practices I'm into right now.
Oh, no, I thank you for sharing that. I mean, those are the things that make all the difference. And I think they're so important. And you're also making me feel really better about myself, because I always say if I want those French fries, I need to have some salad with that too. So I've got a salad and fries combo. So no, I think that's great. So I guess, you know, kind of, I love what you're building, and we're also excited to see what you continue to chart forward with Radical Health. And you're only just getting started. As you think about kind of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
To the young Ivelyse, to my younger self, I would absolutely say, you're early, you're not wrong, and do it boldly, do it bravely, and even if your voice trembles, you've got to speak up.
It's beautiful. And so then I guess the flip side of that would be, you've got many more chapters of your book to write, but as you think about kind of the legacy that you want to leave behind, what would be the title of your autobiography?
She did it her way, and she did it anyway. And I just think about that as like, if you would have told the younger me that I'd be here today, and if I look back many years from now, I always wanted to know that it was done in truth, in authenticity, in love. And even when everyone else said, this is wild and crazy, I still did it my way. And my way really being in community.
Absolutely. Well, Ivelyse, I mean, this has just been so inspiring. I think it's so apparent just how authentic and how energetic you are, and that really shows in all your work. So thank you for all that you're doing to really move the needle in our industry and really shake things up. So we appreciate it, and we're really excited to see where Radical is headed.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. This has been a joy and fun, and thank you for just holding space so we could chat and learn from one another.